The night settled over the town slowly, like a lid being placed without sound, and the jail stood at the edge of it, squared and patient. The boards held the day's heat, the lantern inside burned low, and nothing moved except the river beyond the cottonwoods. From the road, the building looked the same as it always had, but the ground around it felt watched. A breeze passed, then stopped, as if it had been told to wait. The jail was not new, and it was not cruel. Yet, it carried the memory of men who had stood outside it too long. Across the yard, a single post leaned where a horse was sometimes tied, and tonight, the rope hung loose. The sheriff had seen that rope tight many nights before, had heard boots and voices and arguments end there. This night was different, though nothing announced it. He stood back from the corner of the building, letting the dark keep him, and watched the space between the door and the road. The town behind him had quieted, the way towns do when they decide to sleep without agreeing on why. Some windows were dark, some held light that did not move. A dog barked once and stopped. The sheriff adjusted his hat and waited, not because he had to, but because waiting had served him before. He knew the jail's habits, the way sound carried through its door, the way shadows leaned. He also knew the road and who used it after dark. Tonight, there was a man where there should not have been one. The cowboy sat on the step, hat on his knee, lantern at his feet, facing the door as if it might answer him. He was not guarding it in any official way, and he was not trying to hide. The sheriff could see the man's hands, open and empty, resting like they had nowhere else to go. The scene held, unbroken. Time passed without measure, marked only by the insect sound near the river and the lantern's slow breath. The sheriff thought of other nights, louder nights, and found no use for them here. He did not ask why the cowboy was there. He did not step closer. The jail door stayed closed, the lock quiet, as if it had agreed to wait as well. From where he stood, the sheriff could smell dust and old wood and the faint oil of the lantern. He listened for voices that did not come. The cowboy shifted once, then went still again. Nothing else offered itself. The sheriff considered the town's appetite for answers and decided not to feed it yet. He remained where he was, letting the night arrange itself. In the distance, the clock marked the hour, and the sound fell flat. The sheriff watched the cowboy watch the door and allowed the picture to stay. He knew morning would ask its questions soon enough. For now, the night had its own order, and he chose to keep it. The land around the jail seemed to accept the choice, holding the air steady. Nothing had happened, and that, he understood, was the thing that mattered. He stayed a moment longer, then turned slightly, still not speaking. Behind him, the town slept without knowing what had been allowed. The night remained intact. The sheriff counted his steps back to the road, each one deliberate, each one quiet. He did not look back. The lantern continued to burn at the cowboy's feet, patient and small. Somewhere beyond the trees, water moved and did not care. The jail waited, the door closed, the lock quiet, the night long. The sheriff let the scene hold as it was, knowing it would be remembered for reasons no one would say. He left the space between the road and the door untouched. The night accepted the allowance and kept its silence. Nothing else needed to be done yet. The sheriff carried that quiet with him as he walked away, unmarked, unfinished, and unresolved. Behind him, the jail and the cowboy held their places until the dark decided otherwise. No sound followed, and the night kept what it had been given. The cowboy had come to the jail the way he came to most places, without announcing himself and without hurry, as if the road had carried him there rather than the other way around. He was not young, but not old enough to be finished with things, and his face held the marks of weather more than time. People in town knew him by sight and little else, which suited him. He worked when work was there, slept where he was told, and moved on when it ended. That night, he had finished late. A small job at the edge of town that left his hands sore and his thoughts empty, and instead of turning toward the bunkhouse, he followed the road until the jail appeared, solid and plain, waiting like it always did. He stopped because something in him told him to, though he could not have named it. The lantern inside the jail cast a dull square of light through the window, and he could hear no voices, only the low sound of someone breathing beyond the door. He sat on the step because it was there, because it faced the door, because it gave him a place to put his weight down. He rested his hat on his knee and set his own lantern at his feet, lighting it more out of habit than need. The flame steadied, and with it, he did. The cowboy was used to watching things without touching them: cattle from a ridge, weather from a distance, men from across a table. He had learned early that not everything improved when approached. From the step, he could see the road stretch away into the dark, could imagine who might come and who would not. He did not check the lock, though he could have reached it easily. He did not knock. He did not speak the name of the man inside, though he knew it. Instead, he listened. The breathing behind the door was uneven, not panicked, not calm, something between. The cowboy shifted once, adjusting his boot, then went still again. He thought of other nights he had stood watch without being asked, nights when someone needed presence more than protection. He had never called it kindness, and he would not start now. It was simply what was left to do when the world narrowed to a door and a dark stretch of road. He knew the sheriff would hear about it if the town woke loud. New questions would come with daylight, but those were not yet his concern. For now, the night was enough. A moth struck the lantern glass and slid away. The cowboy watched it and then returned his attention to the door. He wondered briefly about what the man inside thought of the sound of boots on the step, of the light outside that did not move away. He wondered if the man knew he was there. He decided it did not matter. Presence did not require acknowledgement. The cowboy's shoulders loosened as the minutes passed, his breathing settling into the rhythm of the night. He remembered a time, years back, when he had waited outside another door for reasons he had since forgotten, only that he had stayed until morning because leaving had felt worse. That memory did not explain this one, but it did not need to. The jail remained quiet, the town beyond it distant and asleep. Somewhere, a board creaked, and then did not creak again. The cowboy leaned back slightly, letting the wood of the step press into him, grounding him there. He had no authority, no badge, no duty that would stand up in daylight. But he had chosen the place, and the choice held. He did not plan for the night to become a story. He did not imagine the sheriff watching from the dark. He only knew that leaving now would change something, and staying would keep it as it was, at least for a while. So he stayed. The lantern burned low and steady, and the cowboy watched the door the way a man watches a horizon, not expecting it to move, but ready if it did. The night accepted him without comment, and he accepted it back, settling into the long, quiet work of being there while nothing happened. The choice did not arrive as a moment the cowboy could point to later. No clear edge where before and after separated cleanly, but it gathered slowly while he sat there, building weight the way frost builds on a fence rail. He became aware of it when he noticed how his body had settled, how his boots no longer shifted, how his hands rested without tension. He understood then that he had already chosen something simply by staying. The door remained closed, the breathing inside steady enough to be human, and the road empty enough to feel deliberate. He could leave. No one had told him to stay. No rule bound him to the step, and no law would mark his absence as a failure. He thought of the sheriff and the way authority moved through town like a weather pattern, sometimes felt, sometimes not. If the sheriff returned and found the step empty, nothing would need explaining. If the sheriff returned and found him there, something would already have been allowed. The cowboy weighed these possibilities without hurry. He did not frame them as right or wrong, only as different kinds of cost. Leaving would cost nothing immediately and something later, though he could not say what. Staying would cost something immediately, though he could not name it, and perhaps nothing later, or perhaps more. The night did not help him decide. It only held its shape and waited. He listened again to the breathing behind the door and heard a pause, then a deeper pull of air, as if the man inside had shifted or woken. The cowboy felt the small pull to knock then, to let his presence be known, to turn the quiet into something shared. He resisted it. Sound would change the balance, and sound would invite response, and response would demand explanation. He chose instead to keep the space between them intact. His lantern guttered slightly, and he adjusted the wick with his thumb, careful not to lift it or let the light throw new shapes. He thought of the town waking early, of men who would come with opinions already formed, of how stories began before facts were asked for. He thought of the sheriff's face in daylight, composed and unreadable, and of how even that face could be pressed by the wrong kind of noise. The choice he faced was not between action and inaction, but between exposure and containment. He could expose the night by stepping into it, letting it open and spill into morning. Or he could contain it by staying still, holding the shape until it passed on its own. He had learned, in other places and other years, that containment sometimes spared more than it saved, though it rarely earned thanks. The cowboy shifted his weight once, enough to feel the step beneath him, then went still again. He did not decide to protect the man inside, nor to protect the town from him. He decided only to protect the night from becoming something else too soon. This was not a thought he put into words. It lived instead in his posture, in the way his shoulders dropped and his eyes fixed on the door without challenge. He accepted that by doing so he would be seen, that his presence would be read later in ways he could not control. He accepted that staying would make him part of whatever followed, even if nothing followed at all. The road remained empty. The lock did not turn. The breathing behind the door evened out again, and the pause that had caught his attention dissolved back into rhythm. The cowboy felt the choice settle fully then, like a stone placed carefully rather than thrown. He would stay until the night decided otherwise. He would not knock. He would not leave. He would not explain. The choice asked nothing more of him than patience, and that, he found, he could give. The waiting took shape as hours, rather than moments, stretching without drama and without sign. The cowboy remained on the step, and the jail remained closed, and between them, the night learned their outlines. Time moved by small signals, the lantern sinking lower, the chill finding new places, the sound of water changing pitch as the river slowed. Nothing arrived to break it. No footsteps, no voices, no sudden light. The road stayed empty, as if it had been set aside. The cowboy marked the passing-by breathing, by the ache in his knees, by the way his thoughts thinned and then returned. He did not count minutes. He counted the spaces between sounds. Once, an owl crossed the dark and vanished. Another time, a board inside the jail creaked, and the breathing beyond the door paused, then continued. The cowboy did not move. He understood that waiting was not absence, but pressure held in place. Each moment added a little more weight, and still he stayed. He wondered, briefly, how the man inside was measuring the same night, whether the light outside the door felt like a guard or a witness. He did not try to guess. Guessing would pull him forward. Instead, he watched the line where light met dark and kept it steady. Somewhere behind him, the town shifted in sleep. A window closing, a stove settling, the quiet labor of people turning over without waking. The sheriff did not return. That, too, became part of the waiting. The cowboy had expected it, and then he had not, and both expectations fell away. He noticed how the night seemed to gather around the jail, how the air near the door felt thicker, as if the place itself were listening. But the waiting asked him questions without words. How long would he stay? What would he do if someone came? What would he say if asked? He answered none of them. He let them remain questions. The lantern flame shortened and steadied again, and he trimmed it once more with care. His hands moved slowly, practiced, as if speed might be mistaken for intent. The cold pressed harder, and he wrapped his coat closer, feeling the fabric rasp. He thought of leaving, not as an option, but as a shape, and set it aside. He thought of mourning, not as relief, but as intrusion, and kept his eyes on the door. The breathing inside grew deeper, then shallow, then deep again, tracing its own path through the dark. The cowboy matched it without meaning to, his chest rising and falling until the two rhythms nearly aligned. He felt the odd calm of it, but the way waiting can quiet even worry. Time thinned. The night did not end, but it changed, the black lifting toward a duller shade that promised nothing yet. Somewhere far off, metal rang once and stopped. The waiting held. The cowboy did not shift. He did not speak. He did not look back. He let the hours pass through him, believing that if anything were to happen, it would find him where he was. And so he stayed, carrying the waiting as if it were work, letting it do what it would. He considered the ground beneath the step. How many boots had worn it smooth? How many nights it had held without speaking? He felt the town's distance widen, not in miles, but in attention, as if whatever would be decided here would not need witnesses. The waiting became a kind of agreement. He would not rush it, and it would not rush him. The lantern's light touched the dust and made it honest. His thoughts slowed until they were almost useful. He remembered nothing clearly and planned nothing at all. When the air shifted again, he noticed, and when it did not, he noticed that too. The door remained closed. The road remained empty. The night kept its terms. It would hold until morning or until someone broke it, and either way, the waiting would have done its work. The cowboy accepted that and stayed. No signal came, and none was required. The night remained sufficient. It asked for nothing. And he agreed. Quietly. Morning did not arrive as a clear beginning, but as a thinning of the dark, a soft undoing that made the shapes around the jail less private. The cowboy noticed it first in the way the lantern's light lost its edge, how it no longer felt like the only claim on the space. He let the flame die without ceremony, twisting the wick down until the glass went dull, and the cold stepped closer to take its place. The door stayed closed longer than he expected, long enough for him to wonder if the night had decided to leave everything as it was. Then the sound came, not loud, just the turn of the lock from the inside, careful and slow. The door opened a hand's width and stopped. The man inside did not step out at once. He stood there, framed by the doorway, eyes adjusting, taking in the figure on the step, who had not moved. For a moment they looked at each other without recognition, two men meeting after a shared labor neither had named. The man stepped out finally, straightening his coat, nodding once as if to a fact rather than a person, and moved past the cowboy without speaking. He walked toward the road and did not look back. The cowboy stayed seated until the sound of his boots faded, until the space he had occupied thinned back into ordinary air. Only then did he stand, joints stiff, body reminding him of the hours he had held. He did not follow. He did not watch the road. He turned instead toward the jail, now empty, its purpose spent for the moment. The sheriff arrived later, after the sun had cleared the low buildings and the town had begun to stir. He came alone, hoarse, slow, eyes already measuring what had changed. He saw the open door, the cold lantern, the cowboy standing off to the side where he had ended up without deciding to be there. He did not ask questions right away. He walked the space once, looked at the step, at the dust, at the way the door hung open, as if it had forgotten to close itself. When he spoke, it was not an accusation but an inventory. Who had been inside when the lock had turned? Whether anyone had come in the night. The cowboy answered what was asked and nothing more. He said he had been there. He said the door had opened from the inside. He said no one else had come. The sheriff listened, nodding, fitting these facts into something that did not quite hold. He looked once at the road and then away. The town noticed soon enough. Someone had seen the man walking free before sunrise. Someone else had seen the cowboy by the jail long after dark. But the story began to take shape before noon, pressed and pulled by voices that wanted it to mean something useful. Some said the cowboy had guarded the door. Others said he had kept it closed. A few said he had been part of something quieter and worse. The sheriff did not correct them. He let the talk run until it thinned on its own. The consequence of the night did not land as punishment or praise but as a shift, subtle and persistent. The cowboy found work harder to come by for a time, not refused outright but offered later than before, given to others first. Doors did not close to him, but they did not open as easily. Men looked at him longer, as if waiting for something he would not give them. He did not explain himself, because explanation would have turned the waiting into a claim, and he had made none. But the man who had walked free did not return to town, but his absence became part of the place. A gap people stepped around without agreeing it was there. The sheriff carried the night with him into other decisions, measuring silence differently than before, aware of how little it took to let something pass. He did not speak of it, but he did not forget it either. The jail returned to its habits, the door closing and opening as it always had. But the step held a new memory, worn in by hours rather than boots. The consequence was not dramatic. No law was broken, no order restored. Yet something had moved, and it did not move back. The cowboy felt it in the way mornings looked at him now, in the way evenings lingered. He had allowed something unusual, not by opening a door or breaking a rule, but by staying where he was until the night finished its work. That allowance followed him, quiet and unclaimed, shaping what came after without asking permission. Years later, the story was still told without names or dates, and that was how people knew it mattered. It was spoken of as a night when nothing happened, which was never meant as dismissal, only as description, because nothing had happened loudly enough to claim ownership. People said a cowboy had sat outside the jail until morning, and they said the sheriff had seen him and allowed it. And after that, the telling changed, depending on who carried it. Some remembered it as mercy, others as weakness, and a few as something colder that had no word. The place itself remembered it differently. The step wore down faster than the others, smooth where a man had held his weight for hours. And children were told not to sit there for long, because it made them quiet. The jail kept its shape, but the air around it thinned in a way no one could explain, as if nights passed more easily there afterward. The cowboy did not stay in town forever. He worked where he was needed, moved when work ended, and carried the night with him without naming it. In other places, he would pause longer than required, stand where waiting did more than speaking, and people noticed without agreeing on why. The sheriff aged into his work and out of it, and when he spoke of authority later, he spoke of restraint first, which puzzled those who wanted rules to sound firmer. He never told the story straight through. He mentioned it only in pieces, as an example of how a town could survive a night by not pressing it too hard. The man who walked free became a shape more than a memory, a line in the story that bent away from town and did not return. Some said he had been given something that night. The others said nothing had been given at all, only left untouched. The telling never settled on one version, and that unsettled people who preferred stories to end clean. The land did not seem to mind. Dust still gathered on the road, the river still changed its sound with the season, and the jail still opened and closed as it was meant to. Yet those who paid attention said the ground near the step felt heavier, not dangerous, just aware, as if it had learned something about patience. When asked what the story meant, older voices answered by repeating it, not explaining it, trusting the listener to find their own weight in it. They said a knight once chose quiet over instruction, and that choice stayed. Over time, the town learned to live with unanswered space, to let some things pass without being named, and that learning shaped them more than any ruling. The story traveled farther than the place, carried by people who had never seen the jail, who spoke of it as an example of how presence could alter a night without changing its surface. It was never written down first, only later, when someone feared it might fade. Even then, the written version lacked something the spoken one kept, a pause that could not be captured. Those who heard it young remembered the pause more than the words. Those who heard it late wished they had been there earlier. The night itself was gone, but the allowance remained, a small opening in how people thought about action and restraint. This was not a lesson taught, only a memory shared. It endured because it refused to explain itself. This is how it was remembered.